Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Christopher Moonlight, or if you are outside of the YouTube sphere, Christopher Cooksey. I am a filmmaker and artist. I was these things before AI started, and I am these things now. I am going to talk about an article I wrote on both Substack and my Subscribestar. So before we start, I just want to say that I am promoting Escape from Planet Omega 12, and I have the pitch for my Subscribestar and Substack members here on YouTube. I hope you'll check that out. It is a sci-fi action adventure for adults in the tradition of heavy metal, Fire and Ice, the Frank Frazetta style stuff, including more recent animation like Love, Death, Robots, and my favorite, Samurai Jack. It's about a woman marooned on an alien planet that has no civilization, and she has to not only fight for survival, but she's on the run from mysterious forces that are trying to capture her along the way. She makes companions out of primitive alien life forms, as well as her little robot companion. It's a lot of fun. It's more aimed towards adults, although it is not inappropriate for younger audiences. Just kind of sexy, but it's a lot of fun, and it incorporates my love of practical effects miniatures, as well as traditional animation, puppets, and yes, AI to fill in all the blanks where I otherwise wouldn't be able to afford to. I am currently trying to get my Subscribestar and my Substack to raise, I don't know, $70,000 to $100,000 to make it so that I can turn this into a series that I do full time. But at the moment, I am funded enough to get the pilot movie out. Anyway, of course, this involves AI, and I also have, again, here's the Subscribestar for Escape from Planet Omega 12. You can watch pitch material, and there is free content for the free subscribers, but paid subscribers can't support. Anyway, let's move on to this. Hollywood doesn't have an AI problem. It has an economic ignorance problem, including references on the How Scary is AI talk at Midsummer Scream. This article is by me. I wrote this after a trip I took to California. I currently live in Texas, but I moved to California from England when I was 6 years old. I grew up right outside of Hollywood. I have been involved in the industry, and I saw its impending collapse so long before AI was ever a factor. And the things that I saw are what are making the industry collapse now. It's why Cartoon Network is gone, why Paramount Studios is collapsing right before our eyes right now. All this stuff that's going on was going to happen anyway. So I wrote an article because I see, especially the guilds are trying to blame AI, but there's more behind it than that. AI is not the problem. It's not going to be the problem. It's just the scapegoat that if we continue to go in the direction of blaming AI, it's not going to change or fix anything. So I want to address it. And my experience at Midsummer Scream really kind of fortified my opinions about this, because it is clear to me that nobody in the industry is interested in really addressing the problems. And maybe the people who are too afraid to speak up because they will lose the little work that they are able to get. I do know people within the industry that I know agree with me, but they're not going to say anything because they've got to keep money coming in. So anyway, here we go. Well, it's been over a week since I returned from my journey to California for the Big Man Comics fan meetup in San Diego, and then to be part of the Midsummer Scream Halloween and Horror Conventions panel on AI in filmmaking at the Long Beach Convention Center titled How Scary is AI? And boy, do I have a lot to say about the subject. Oh, by the way, before I go on from here, the Big Man Comics fan meetup in San Diego. It was during San Diego Comic-Con. I went to San Diego first just to be a part of that because it had Chris Gore and Alan Ng from Film Threat there, Angry Badger, Gary from Neurotic. These are all people who have their finger on the pulse of what's really going on in entertainment, and they're not afraid to comment about it. And of course, that makes them pariahs in the eyes of Hollywood, and they've had a lot of dirty smear campaigns pitched against them because people are, again, they don't want to hear the truth. And I have already, by the way, I will say this, since this article came out and since I've not been shy about my opinions about AI, I have definitely been, shall we say, it's been implied that my means of providing for myself might be gone after. Kind of too late to go back on it now. So, it's moving forward. I don't know if anybody has any of the power or sway to do that, but it's been implied. Information on, LinkedIn or whatever, they'll find out who I work for. So, by the way, AI generated this. I didn't spend a bunch of time trying to fix it. It's just a thumbnail. AI is a great thumbnail generator. Did that in Midjourney. Okay, so mainly it's because there wasn't any way to address what was spoken within a 1 hour long panel that was scheduled early in the day, where a lot of claims were made over the sound of a malfunctioning convention center fire alarm. But even then, it drove home for me that a lot of people within the industry don't know, or at least won't acknowledge, that they are just as much, if not more, responsible for the kill shot that has left the industry, as they know it, in its final death throes. Furthermore, it hasn't dawned on them that what they're experiencing right now isn't so much a downturn as it is the equivalent of an infrastructural organ shutdown. Now, I think I said that wrong. Infrastructural. It's a hard word to say. Now, to be clear, I'm having trouble reading my own stuff. Now, to be clear, I didn't derive all of this from the panel, nor will what I write here be entirely about the event. It will be the starting point, and then I'll branch out from there. This is going to be in-depth, so get ready for some reading or listening to me talk. Yes, this is going to be long, by the way. You probably already saw the length of this video. So let's start with a quote here. I'm going to do my best Danny DeVito. "This business is dead. Don't blame me. I didn't kill it. It was dead when I got here." That's from Lawrence Larry the Liquidator Garfield in the movie Other People's Money. To be clear, I'm not trying to be hyperbolic or attack anyone's character when I say these things, nor do I take pleasure in the idea that a 100-plus year industry is about to disappear. And I really want to emphasize, by the way, this is breaking my heart. Friends of mine who have been successful for years have no money coming in at the moment. People are losing their homes. I'm seeing people stress out all over the place about how they're going to provide for their families. And I have been through this myself. I do not take any pleasure in this. I'm not saying this stuff to gloat, and I am not saying this stuff to do anything other than help people understand what's going on so they can make decisions and navigate it. But I guess I addressed this in the article anyway. So even though I'm an independent filmmaker, I do not believe that we are all better off. I apologize. I'll get a stride going here. Even though I'm an independent filmmaker, I do believe that we are all better off when industries thrive. I want to see more people be successful doing what they love, not less. Reading people's desperate stories of foreclosure and bankruptcy is something that never fails to pain me, and I want it to stop. However, I'm also not going to sugarcoat things for the sake of sparing anyone's feelings. If I think an idea is wrong, disingenuous to enact, or did I mean to say dangerous to enact? Anyway, disingenuous, or motivated by anything other than the stated goals, I'm going to point out those fallacies directly using what is measurable. This is a very serious situation for everyone involved, and there are market, sociological, and technological forces in play that are far beyond anyone's control at this point. Lives are changing forever, and those caught unaware or not ready to make difficult choices are suffering the most. You either adapt to make your place in what's happening, or you drown, cursing whomever your imagination has conjured as the pariah in it. There are about to be a lot of bodies washed up to shore because they thought they could stop the tide and didn't want to bother to learn to swim. What I say is not personal. It's meant to help. First, some context. The convention panel featured myself, filmmaker and WGA member Joe Russo, not the Russo brothers Joe Russo, a different one, as well as an associate professor at UCLA, Guy Van Den Broek, who works doing the math equations that power AI. Our host and moderator was novelist and entertainment journalist Joshua Milliken. Josh Milliken invited me to the convention. Very nice guy, very hardworking, family man. I like him a lot. I was there to represent the pro-AI side of the discussion and Mr. Russo the anti-AI viewpoint, which so far as I can tell is in line with most Hollywood guilds' positions. Two aspects of the talk stood out to me, in no particular order. The first was when I talked about how AI creates images not by stealing from other images, but by using them to learn and recognize objects, settings, and situations based on reoccurring patterns. If a person sees various buses, for example, over time, and you ask them to draw a bus from memory, most likely they will sketch out something recognizable as a bus to the average person, but without details specific to make the model of a specific one. Unless the artist has trained to know these details. The same goes for colors. If you're familiar with a certain color, as most of us are, you can discern and choose a preferable hue. We can learn the variations of view, angles, and lighting, and so can an AI. So, when you ask an AI to create a purple bus as seen from the back in a bird's eye view at sunset, it can create one for you from scratch because it knows how to identify these things and combine them just like a human artist does. Most likely, when you read that, you conjured one in your own mind's eye too. No copyright has been violated. You imagined an original work. So did the AI. As artists, we learn to do this not only by observing the world around us, but also by observing how other artists perceive and approach recreating and combining them. When we start out, our works often resembles our favorite artists because every starting point is somewhat a singularity. But as we gain greater and more diverse points of reference, our journey to originality is informed and influenced by an expanded sense of the world. Russo's response, while I was in the middle of explaining this, was to hold out his hand, palm down, and rock it side to side in that so-so gesture, which told me he was eager to shoot down anything that might weaken his perspective in the eyes of the audience, which I will elaborate on why I think that as we go on. Scroll up a little. What stood out to me when he gave his rebuttal was his rebuttal was that repeatedly referred to AI as the plagiarism machine. I think I need to rewrite that sentence. When I asked if he could define plagiarism so we could better continue our discussion on agreed upon definitions, he started to describe it as AI scraping data so that it could then use other writers' work to create scripts. Plagiarism, which anyone who claims the ability to write should know, is the act of taking a passage from the work of one person and reproducing it in their own writing without attributing it to the original person who wrote it. So it's just funny to me that when I asked him to define plagiarism, he started to describe what AI does, not the actual definition of plagiarism, again, trying to skirt the issue. My feeling is that largely anyone in the creative field who feels threatened by AI to any degree can't actually make the plagiarism argument with this definition alone. So their only recourse is to skirt past it as quickly as possible to a much broader one that they hope through force of collective will can hold up in court, where future regulations can weight the market in their favor. I hear people talk about how we can maybe use ethically trained AI, but really that just boils down to a buzzword smokescreen that translates into let's tie the hands of progress behind its back so we can beat it down without too much of a fight. That's still a thin hope for anyone with that mindset, as historically the courts have almost always sided with technological progress over copyright concerns. See the cases against VHS and Google Books for more on that. And this is something that I didn't quite address as much as I wanted to because it's a long article, but essentially the threat of trying to use copyright claims against AI, which I think don't actually work, and it's back and forth in the courts. Some decisions have been for AI, and recently there was one saying like, well, yeah, maybe they shouldn't train on copyrighted material. It's like, and I will get more into in the article, the copyrighted material is what we all train on. Anything that enters the public square is something that human beings train on. And anyway, the fact is that if we decide to err on the side of caution and kind of actually overreach with copyright laws, we're only going to hamstring our own progress, while other countries who are perfectly willing to bypass all of that will trounce us in the market, and it will only be worse for Hollywood in that case. So let me continue with the article. Here we start to land on the economic aspect of my argument, but I'm not quite ready to go into that until I've reached the second intriguing aspect of our panel. To help refine Mr. Russo's definition and incorporate the audience into the discussion, I presented a thought experiment. If I were to read a bunch of stories by the famous horror author Stephen King and then write my own story based on what I had learned, would I be considered to be plagiarizing Mr. King? Furthermore, would he be entitled to compensation? Because imagine a world where every time you painted a picture, you got bombarded with people that said, hey, you made that picture because you saw what I did. No one would ever paint a picture again because everyone would be terrified that they would be sued to oblivion by anyone claiming an influence. Anyway, I don't remember the exact answer given, but I do remember thinking it was a bit vague and unsatisfactory. But to be fair, the fire alarm was still going off, and I don't want to misrepresent Mr. Russo. And that's true. The fire alarm started going off at the very beginning of our panel, and it didn't stop until like an hour after the panel was done. It was a nightmare for the convention. My answer is no, of course not, because you can't copyright style. Only actual works you produce, and if you were to try, you would end up hamstringing anyone and everyone to follow in any creative field forever after. Imitation is an integral and necessary part of the beginning of learning to do anything, whether you be human or machine. There is no way around it. And I challenge anyone to show me how there is. That's why we have fair use laws. if it were not this way, then the United States would have every other country running roughshod over us in the market forever and always. And I apologize, I realize I'm commenting ahead of some of the points I make in the article. I'll try not to do that, but sometimes I can't help myself. This brings me to the second thing I found to be very interesting about the panel, which is the notion that AI is simultaneously a threat to artists everywhere, while at the same time being unable to produce anything of usable quality. While I opened my argument with While I opened my argument with Josh showing the audience posters of my first film, The Quantum Terror, which is hand-painted, and my upcoming second animated feature, Escape from Planet Omega 12, which is AI-generated and Photoshop composited, and you saw that at the beginning of the video, along with the first Omega 12 teaser trailer, Mr. Russo opened his rebuttal by showing a trailer for an AI-generated movie called Next Stop Paris, which I have put in the article, but I'm not going to play. I don't know if I'll get copyright struck for doing that, but you can go to the article. I'll leave a link in the comments, and I'll do a pinned comment, and you can watch it in here as well as this, which I'm about to bring up. His point was that it's not very good, which is easy to see, and therefore AI shouldn't be looked at as something that can replace a human being's job. There is a problem with this argument in that if we are to use this single early example to rate its performance, then we would have to ignore every historical precedence of emerging technology and how it advanced over time. Printing would still be done with engravings, we'd still all be driving Model Ts, and every Pixar movie would still look like Tin Toy. Yet, we live with the evidence that all of those have pushed far beyond their original boundaries. And again, here's Tin Toy. You can watch that on YouTube, linked here. In addition to this visual example, he gave an anecdote to illustrate much of the same point. Fortunately, I don't have to attempt to paraphrase this one because he also gave it in an interview with Dread Central. Josh Milliken probably met him through Dread Central. Josh parted ways with Dread, but obviously he's still got a lot of connections. So here's the quote. And when I read this, actually, before I read this, I'm going to read something else from the article. Here's the article. It's linked in. So you can read his full thoughts here, which I think is important to do. I'm not going to read his entire interview here, but here's something that I just want to keep in mind here. I'm going to read this here. And I would say to my friend who worked in the business affairs sides of the studios, we talk about this and they'd say, Joe, are writers going on strike? And I'd say, I don't know. Are you going to give us a fair deal? Again, I hope he defines fair deal better than he defined his arguments on AI. And their response would be, we've already given you all our money. And I'd say, well, then we're probably going on strike. This is going to fall into the economic ignorance. And when I say ignorance, I'm not saying that Mr. Russo is stupid. I'm just saying that I'm using ignorance in its actual definition, which is we're all ignorant in some way, lacking in knowledge in a subject. I don't think that economically most people in the Writers Guild or in most places in Hollywood are well-versed enough in economics to understand the repercussions of the things that they're demanding, and therefore they're unwittingly demanding more of their own demise. And this is what I'm trying to encourage people to do, is to take up some economic reading so that they can understand better what they're asking for, and everyone will benefit. But so anyway, here's the anecdote that he gave. So I'm reading directly from his quote. I was working on a horror script recently, and I asked it to help me with a scene where I was describing two characters who were locked in a closet, and they discovered that they were in there with a monster. And ChatGPT spit me back out a scene, and it basically said they get out of the closet, the monster chases them through the house, out the door. They find a police car. They get the cop, and the cop arrests the monster. It took one scene, and they gave me a whole story that you would never use. And I think the reality is the studios want it to work, but the amount of time and effort it's going to take to put in prompts that will turn out a decent story is going to be almost zilch. It might be able to help them write a synopsis, but I do not think it's going to be able to write them a screenplay. I don't think it's going to be able to write them a good screenplay, and I don't think it's going to be able to write them a screenplay that even they're going to want to read. Just a little aside, I'm coming at it more from the VFX animation visual artist side, and he's coming at it from the writer's side. But we're going to address this quote. Here he admits that the prompts he put in were not sufficient to get what he was looking for out of ChatGPT, because by his words, it sounds like he stopped at the first iteration. As someone who uses AI regularly, I can tell you that prompting is its own form of work. You have to know what you want as well as how to ask for it, and then be able to refine your feedback in order to get the results you're looking for, just as producers who are involved in the creative process do. I know for a fact he could have kept on pushing it until he got a more usable result, but that would go against his point, so he didn't. It suits him better to be vague, get a silly result, and throw up his hands and pronounce, "This proves the argument that it just can't be creative in the way that people can." However, there I do agree with Mr. Russo on that point, but what I don't see is why it's even part of the discussion. Of course it doesn't. It was never meant to, and to claim otherwise is to fundamentally misattribute the concerns being raised. We both agreed at the panel that the expectation of AI to completely cut human beings out of the creative process is folly. And I appreciate that he acknowledged that where we do see eye to eye, Audiences show up to make a connection to the human being telling the story, who is there to proclaim their view of some common ground that we all share in life, to give a bit of a fresh perspective so that the audience can say, yes, I never looked at it that way, but now that I see it through this new lens, I feel some amusement, some relation, and it's useful to me. The audience no more wants to make that connection with the machine than the artist would want AI to be the audience, that there's no need to lay down the ground rules for that. No reason to put it in a contract or regulate it, because that's the kind of thing the market decides. If someone wants to try, then let them. If they're right, then they will soon learn that there is nothing to be gained by handing art over to robot brains completely. And I'm going to get later down in the article, I'm going to talk a little bit about, I personally feel that one of the disadvantages of the guilds is if you join a guild, you're at the mercy of whoever's at the wheel. And if that person doesn't know what to ask for or what's reasonable, then they're going to drive you all off a cliff. There are good reasons to have guilds, but we'll get into that and why I feel like the guilds have kind of lost sight of those reasons and how they should kind of reassess, get back to their roots. Anyway, here we go. I view AI as the artistic equivalent of a forklift. If you need to lift thousands of pounds of creative weight from point A to point B, you can do all the lifting yourself, spend a bunch of money to have others help you, or stack it on that contraption and do it in a fraction of the time for much less cost. Yes, I'll get to the part where those people don't get hired for the job, but we have a few more things to address first. If the point is that AI simply can't do what people do, then you don't have anything to worry about to begin with. It's a non-issue. However, the guilds seem to be mighty concerned that AI is already doing just that, and as a result, the industry workers are suffering. But here's the kicker. The industry was already on the decline before AI entered the playing field. It's very important. The entertainment industry is now more performative than ever before, which in front of the production camera is just fine. But in a world where everyone has a documentary camera in their pocket at all times and anyone can give their opinion on the internet, suddenly everyone is more worried about their persona than reality. When you understand that opinions and choices will bring you status and accolades from your peers, which ones might please your ledger of connections and bring you more of them, learned behavior can quickly become habitual, and any in-depth investigation that might go against the tide of popular consensus potentially becomes a liability. From my perspective, Mr. Russo is a case in point. Again, from the Dread Central interview, we can see this via the introduction, highlighting his accomplishments. Quote, "But Joe is so much more than a podcast producer. He's also a writer, producer, and director who has had a hand in creating a fleet of exciting feature films. After spending time in Hollywood and crafting numerous movies, Russo found himself a member of the Writers Guild, where he is now a strike captain." End quote. No disrespect to Mr. Russo, he has quite a library of movies that he's made, and that is a true accomplishment. It's hard enough making one movie, let alone 12, the 12 that I counted on his IMDb page. Obviously, he is an intelligent and hardworking individual, but there are a few things to unpack here that are telling. With hard work comes no guarantee of success. I sympathize with this situation he and many other filmmakers in Hollywood find themselves in. I intend to watch some of his movies, which are available on video on demand, and I hope you'll check them out as well. However, I can't help but notice that out of the fleet of feature films, none of them are mentioned by name, and 8 out of the 12 are actually shorts. I'm not knocking this. It's still more impressive than my own resume. Part of the self-promotion game is to puff yourself up as much as you can with every ounce of credibility you can muster. Mr. Russo is the real deal, no doubt. But my point is that when you put that much work into your career and you're living in one of the most expensive cities in one of the most expensive states in our country, you may be feeling the sting of not advancing quite as far as you need to in the time you imagined, and the temptation to become cynical about making it on merit alone might have you looking for other ways to gain some quick status, especially when the bubble that is new productions is suddenly much smaller, like a lake full of fish drying up in a puddle. I worked hard to get myself as far outside of the industry as I could, so I then could be able to look back in. This is why these things come to mind when I see that after working for 4 years to become a full-fledged member of the WGA, Russo quickly jumped at the opportunity to become a strike captain. On the surface, it's a keen power move, if my deductions are correct. He gets to place himself front and center among his fellow industry professionals to be seen as an advocate for their best interests, with some press coverage, thus raising himself in their esteem, as together they all march towards a unified goal. Status in Hollywood has a history of being its own currency. There are some problems with this, however. Pursuing a career in the arts can lead to long years of toil without any real recognition or gratification before something hits and you finally get your spotlight, if at all. This is why so many writers and painters will often also sing in bands and invite you to their shows. Come on, you all know one of those, at least one. When you stand on a stage and perform, the applause comes instantaneously, and you feel recognized, which in turn can be very alluring, but many of those people forget to look at it from the other side of the crowd. How many times have you politely clapped for a band that happened to be playing where you were hanging out, only to promptly forget about what you heard or who it was you saw? If your goal is to become a darling of the stage with microphone in hand, then that's the focus you'll attend to and sacrifice for every day. But if it's just a stepping stone to expedient recognition, then the sacrifice might just be that you lose sight of why you wanted to be an artist in the first place, placing you in a kind of limbo between the goal and the high. Now, that's not to say that no strike captain or guild member believes in their cause or has good intentions, but when you split your focus that way and start playing politics to stay in the good graces within the evaporating pond, you cannot be compromised, especially if the facts and the narrative are misaligned. Unfortunately, the unfortunate truth for anyone on that path is that they are. AI is not the cause of those woes. It is merely a market reaction to what has already transpired within the industry. It is delusional to pretend that things can be set right by stopping some imagined enemy. It is hard but necessary to confront the fact that the collective choices on almost every level of the business have led to its demise. But this is exactly what is happening. The landscape is barren and cracked. Burning a witch at the stake won't make it rain. The rest of us got to work on digging wells long ago. And I'm just going to kind of interject and comment a little bit of that. Yeah, there's this idea that if you tear something down, something will automatically spring up in its place. And that is absolutely historically incorrect. The default state of reality is chaos. We as a civilization have built up our society to bring some order, build some walls, and lock out some of the chaos so we can live comfortably without having to worry about starving to death or being eaten. And we've managed to get ourselves pretty darn comfortable. But when something springs up in that that construction of our society, of our civilization, that is new and kind of starts to push out old ways, that's already transpiring. And if you try and tear that new thing down, the old ways aren't just going to spring back in. Once you've opened Pandora's box of doing something a new and more expedient way, that's always going to be a factor. And you can't ever halt progress or halt the evolution of society just to keep you locked in a place where you feel comfortable. That just leads to stagnation. But anyway, on with the argument. On with the article, which is an argument. And now I move away from my assumptions based on my experience with one event and move on to what I see in the collective situation. Here we go. In 2012, my wife and I picked up our family and spent every last cent we had to leave California and bet everything on Texas. As documented more in depth here, and if you click that link, you'll see more about that. I simply didn't see Hollywood, the land I grew up just outside of, as the dream anymore. Technology had already advanced to the point where I felt like I could create my movie at a fraction of the cost. There were digital cameras, green screens, After Effects, and a burgeoning online open source that combined with some creative thinking could accomplish anything, but I still found myself completely mired in negativity from people who couldn't see past their own self-imposed limitations. If they had to play the game, then everyone else should too. I'd lay out a plan, and suddenly I was hearing about how there was no way it could be done without studio money, and I'd have to find a way to go to an executive and beg for funding. Then I'd have to hire so many people according to union regulations, and producers will have notes, and it probably won't make a profit. And you'll have to sign over your intellectual property, and oh, sweet Lord, this isn't a dream, it's a nightmare. Why would I want to work with people who are going to inflate the cost, change it beyond recognition, own the rights, and make sure I never see a dime just so I can maybe have my name in the credits and what? Be another guy in the industry trying to act like he's somebody only to be told I can't work because it's time to pick it? Talk about dumb. No thank you. If there was ever writing on the wall to be heeded, that was it. It was obvious to me then that with technology and hardware becoming more accessible and affordable, the incentive to front load a movie with expenses and a truckload of opinionated department heads all wanting to have a finger in the pie would become redundant. I took the leap of faith and built my wings on the way down as the cliff crumbled behind me, and it paid off. And it did. I made The Quantum Terror, and it's on video on demand now, and I'm living in Texas, and I'm working, and got a happy family. And by the way, I just want to point out the word incentive. You'll see me use that a lot. Incentives comes up in economic literature all the time. It's incentives that drive the economy. Sometimes what's perceived as greed on the surface is actually being incentivized by other market forces or government interfering with market forces. And yes, economics has historically shown the more the government tries to meddle with market forces to fix things, the worse the market gets. Not saying that regulations aren't needed or laws aren't needed. I'm not for anarcho capitalism. I am saying that there is a free market that functions best when the government is not involved, historically speaking. So where were we? Okay. We know I wasn't the only one, because the independent market for entertainment is robust with creators, both homegrown and, like myself, living as industry refugees. But before I talk more about that, we need to address the disintegrating mainstream industry and where AI does factor in. And by the way, I can't remember already if I wrote this in the article or not. I'm not saying that the independent market is doing great at the moment either. But it's in a point of flux. It is a new burgeoning market in the sense that independent used to be a small niche, and now it's blowing up, and it needs to find its way as well. I don't know how it's going to end up, but I'll try and make a few predictions. So here, as far as going back to the disintegrating mainstream industry, I'll break it down like this. Studios got used to overblown productions that made billions. Streaming services entered the market. COVID artificially inflated the market, creating a bubble. The illusion of victory went to everyone's head, and they went nuts with entitlement. The bubble burst, but no one could accept it. This drove everyone in the industry more nuts, which is marketing antimatter. Now, there's nothing for anyone, and it's time to find a new career. I don't like saying that. When Hollywood was riding high in the 90s and early 2000s, it was indeed a healthy and thriving economy being maintained within a tight-knit industry that had ripple effects throughout the world. Everything from corn and cotton farmers to concession vendors, toy makers, and media companies could set projections years in advance based on movie seasons and get big money. But where there's big money, there are increasing amounts of people trying to get at it. At first, it wasn't so bad. Productions got taxed, and there were permit fees, and the guilds made sure they got their cut, even if their members, even then, weren't entirely happy with the deals that were collectively negotiated on their behalf. But as time wore on, the state began to get greedier. talking about how the rich should pay more of their fair share, and convincing the residents that voting politicians more power to take it would somehow improve everyone else's quality of life. Other states saw an opportunity to draw some of that business their way, and so offered studios tax incentives to come and make movies and shows in their state and liven up their economy, which they gladly did. Spending hundreds of millions on making a movie is a huge risk, and any executive with an ounce of sense is going to want to take every opportunity to mitigate it. With losses in tax revenue, California sought to make up for it by increasing taxes on other businesses. Then those couldn't afford it and started leaving. So the state turned to smaller businesses that buckled and folded under the expense. Then the state turned to taxing the working class more, gas, miles driven, and on, driving up costs through constricted supply chains and a diminished skilled labor force because they were leaving too. Or to bust, what did I write here? Or to bust trying to make it in Hollywood. I'll have to go back and revisit what I was trying to write there. I think I typoed something. Never once thinking to cut government spending or siphoning that money into their re-election campaigns, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The proof is in the Golden State's diminished glean and the cost of living statistics. It's called inflation. Printing money on the federal level contributes to it as well, but that's another discussion. Let's backtrack to Netflix and the video on demand boom. An entire video DVD sales and rental industry was obliterated almost overnight, whereas before, a movie that maybe didn't do so well at the box office might get a second life, and successful movies could double their profit. That's where residuals were made too. Physical media sales today are probably less than 1/5 of what they once were in what was once a multi-billion-dollar industry. Now, I don't have the numbers on this specifically, but I was talking to someone that tracks this stuff, and they said roughly the home entertainment business in terms of DVD sales and rentals was something like $20 billion, and now it's down to under $1 billion. So that's a huge loss for Hollywood. You know, $1 billion is a lot of money, and I wouldn't mind having $1 billion. I don't know about you, but I don't, so I'm making this video. Then the streaming wars began, but the infrastructure for maintaining it was huge compared to cable. For a hot minute, the COVID-19 pandemic artificially inflated the market, and studios spent huge money hiring everyone they could to fill productions, fast-tracking a lot of less than qualified individuals into the industry, earning them their union cards, and with them a false sense of having made it, and being entitled to everything they believe came with it. This held for the animation and video game industry as well, especially because those jobs could be done remotely. And that is, there's a AAA video game companies are imploding it right now, and Cartoon Network is shutting down. And it's all happening for the same reason. Meanwhile, the studios found themselves in a predicament of their own making. They were not disclosing their viewership numbers, claiming that it was harder to quantify what shows were earning the platforms their money and which shows didn't have an audience at all. Their refusal to share these statistics sparked suspicion that guild members were being cheated out of their cut of profits, but the truth for many shows was that they were money losers, and only a few select productions were sustaining them all. However, if they admitted that, then their stock would tank and the investors would pull out. So yeah, they really were in a rock and a hard place. And I saw it a lot. There were people that on shows that were clearly not being watched by anybody, claiming that they were owed residuals. You can't get residuals unless the show actually profits. And if you lump all the shows together in one streaming service where it's one bill being paid, then yeah, you gotta You got to quantify the collective whole of all of those shows on a platform, average out all the numbers, all the viewing numbers, and then split the subscription fee pot amongst them based on those numbers. That's actually really, that sounds like an accounting nightmare. Whereas, if a movie is in the box office, or, you can use Nielsen ratings to see how many people watched a show at a certain time, that's a lot easier. But anyway, not saying it can't be done. I'm just saying, wow. So anyway, yeah. And of course, if they admitted that they weren't making money, then people would be like, why are we investing in these shows at all? Let's put our money elsewhere. Where? On top of that, the entitlement from writers, cast, and crew became so great that, driven by trendy ideologies, they started to attack and call for the cancellation of big money earners whose work was what was more than likely keeping so many of them employed well beyond what they deserve to be. Case in point, a lot of people attacked Dave Chappelle for being on Netflix. Dave Chappelle was actually bringing in viewership. Hollywood culture was quickly becoming a liability as its inhabitants were turning toxic, quick to attack and dictate to anyone more successful than themselves, while simultaneously smearing their audience with slurs for daring to criticize, or worse, not watch the substandard content that they had been and still are producing. Yeah, so the money losers were trying to tell the money winners how to be. These dictates infected almost all of the big money franchises, running them into the ground and leaving them valueless. The COVID went away, and the scorned viewership decided they didn't need to keep so many subscriptions, and that they could watch reruns of older yet better shows for free with a few ads. And if a movie came out that looked like it might be good, more often than not, they could just skip the theater and wait a few weeks for it to stream. Kids weren't watching anymore. They have YouTube and TikTok. I have YouTube and TikTok too, by the way. The shows that once produced so much in toy sales were now losing manufacturers millions. This is the ripple effect of the Hollywood economy. It doesn't just affect the writers, the people on set. Toy manufacturers, merchandisers, marketers, popcorn growers. So anyway, no one could set their projections anymore. And if you don't understand what I mean by that, at this point, here's an explainer video. And I included this. I highly recommend you watch it. It's from fee.org. It's their show Out of Frame, hosted then by Sean Malone. And it's called We Set the Economy on Fire, Now What? This video was made during the pandemic and predicted everything that we're experiencing right now. So watch it. It is very educational if you feel you want to understand more about economics. Through the lens of movies, by the way. It's not just numbers and charts. They use really cool movies as examples. So, hey, when is AI going to come into this? Not yet. Hollywood didn't need that to kill itself. I told you already. The bubble had shrunk. Losses were titanic. And still, the guilds thought it was a good time to make demands for more money and insurance that productions would be staffed with even larger amounts of bodies to take up space on sets and writers' rooms. Again, this goes back to Mr. Russo's quote, we've already given you all of our money. And I said, well, then I guess we're probably going on strike. The studios don't have unlimited money. And by the way, studio executives, they get into the business to be rich. That's their incentive. If there's no incentive to be rich, there's no studio executives, there's no productions, and nobody gets a job. And if the studio execs see you're costing them money and you're demanding more and you're incentivizing them by saying we're going to withhold any value, then they're just going to pack up what money they have and strap on their golden parachutes and jump ship. So anyway, let's see. And they got their way. And so the studio said it's not worth it to keep a lot of productions going. And now there's no jobs for a lot of these people. Movie theaters don't have enough to bring in their needed foot traffic. Now theaters are closing down, production divisions close, and studios are buying each other up to stay solvent. And somehow that's AI's fault? No. And by the way, if there's a hit movie, just keep in mind, one hit movie doesn't equal the studio is saved, because it has to cover the cost of all the losses that are still going on, all these different liabilities. The people who created AI were still trying to figure out what to do with their new technology. They actually offered to the artists first so they could be more competitive in their industry, but the artists threw a fit and threatened to boycott products, as is what happened with the art program Clip Studio, for daring to make it an option, so they packed up, apologized, and left. Well, the movie studios were still having a problem. The return on movies and shows was diminished, and therefore, to be profitable, production costs had to go down. In economics, we call that a gap in the market, and AI was ready to fill it. It didn't create it. It was there when they came around. It's not their fault. It's the fault of the greed and hubris that continue to infect this dead-on-arrival patient, a mind virus that has killed its host and is now shocked that a vaccine has been offered to mitigate its spread. You see, at this moment, the studios are watching everything burn and asking themselves the same questions I did when I decided to go indie. Why are we spending so much money on huge projects that no one wants to see, when we could be funding small projects for niche audiences that won't bankrupt us? Why do we want to work with moody unions that can turn on a dime, and this is linked to an example of just that, undermining our efforts with the ultimatum of meeting our demands or they'll tank your project? Why do we need hundreds of people on set when indie filmmakers can do it with less than 10? Why are we letting people we're paying to meet our needs dictate the product when what they demand loses us more again and again? Those are good questions. Those are damn good questions. Another quote from Other People's Money. They sucked you dry. You have no responsibility to them. For the last 10 years, this company blew your money. Did this community ever say, we know times are tough. We'll lower taxes, reduce water and sewer. Check it out. You're paying twice as what you once did 10 years ago, and our devoted employees, who have taken no increases for the past 3 years, are still making twice what they made 10 years ago, and our stock 1/6 of what it was 10 years ago. If you're in the industry waiting for it to owe you a living, it may be terrifying to hear being asked, but guess what? This has always been a gig economy. Only the best ever make a living out of it. Very few make big money and eat well for the rest of their lives. If you want to make it, then you're taking a gamble. Everybody used to understand that. This is not an entitlement. This is not an entitlement. You either accept that reality, that risk, or grow the hell up. Value is determined by scarcity. If there are 1,000 people looking to do a job, but only 4 or 5 openings for it, then you're not going to be able to dictate your fee as easily because someone will bid lower. The jobs are gone for everyone now, so your leverage is 0. Think you can fix that by unionizing? Maybe. If the union is selective and presents its ability to add value that can bring more money to the industry, but no one did that. And so the studios are shutting down any production that contains liabilities and losses. They're shipping what they do have to places that are easier to work with and cheaper. And yes, they're exploring what AI can do for them. I see people using words like greed and exploitation as if that hasn't been a constant in life that every human being has to navigate. What have the unions done for them that they should continue to subsidize what's killing them? What are they bringing the executives to make them feel like they should take a pay cut? They're in it to make movies and merchandise that make money, not employ people. Go to the ones worthy of your moral standard, innocent angels that you are, and give them a reason to want to keep you on at a fair wage if you can find them. The rest will look at the score, grab what they can, and bail out with their golden parachutes because it's either that or a nosedive into the tarmac. Again, we see ethics as a smokescreen, and right here and now is where it's gotten us. An actress once told me, if you can be happy doing anything else than acting, do that. Very smart. I think a lot of people enter Hollywood looking for status or thinking it will be their ticket to riches and fame. Status is alluring, and what bigger status is there than to be one of the people making those images on the silver screen, walking the red carpet and having reporters hold a microphone up to you and tell you that the world wants to know what's in your head. That's not how it is anymore. But most don't want to believe that because it's a promise they grew up with. If that's you, then let it go and go seek happiness somewhere else. It's out there. I, on the other hand, am one of those unlucky types who can't be happy unless I'm crafting my stories, building my set pieces, and putting them all together to make illusions of light and fancy. I'm driven. I love it so much that I want to spend all my free time either doing it or figuring out how to get it done. Do I want to make money? Of course. Do I want to reach you, dear audience, and thrill you? Absolutely. Would I still do it even if those things would never happen? No doubt. However, I've already found success in the independent sphere, and I think as a consequence, not only can I confidently move forward, but offer some perspective on how I'll be accomplishing my goals and what the industry might do to integrate itself into this burgeoning new entertainment economy. Again, from other people's money. You know, at one time, there must have been dozens of companies making buggy whips. And I'll bet you the last company around was the one making the best damn buggy whips you ever saw. Now, how would you like to have been a stockholder in that company? You invested in a business, and this business is dead. Let's have the intelligence. Let's have the decency to sign the death certificate, collect the insurance, and invest in something with a future. Nobody has the right to tell you how you should create, especially if it works. Can or should create, especially if it works. That's what's really at the crux of the AI panic. Industry workers who are used to doing things a certain way want to keep them that way because that's where they're comfortable. That's where they've carved out their spot in the hierarchy, or at least that's the hierarchy they've set their sights on scaling. So they feel it's in their best interest to keep their footing familiar and sure. Since they're storytellers, they'll use that skill to try and reshape the narrative to whatever keeps the tide in their favor. That's why they scream scab at anyone who wants to work outside their system and offer an alternative service. That's why they tell everyone they better fall in line or be unemployed. I feel that's the same as being corrupt. No matter what your intentions are, but really, the people scaring each other are just playing into the hands of the bigger threat, making themselves useful to the interests of corporate juggernauts who absolutely want you to be anti-AI advocates. Why? So they can scare you so bad that you'll run around like a chicken little scaring everyone else until there's a blind consensus for laws, licensing, and regulations that only big money companies can afford to circumvent. And the small businesses and startups and independent creators will be squeezed out of the market and will have no choice but to come crawling to them for a place next to them at the table where all anyone can hope for are scraps. Thank you very much for your service. Now get the hell out and don't forget to keep consuming. Where I'm standing, no one has the right to tell me how I can create. I know what works. I used to be an art teacher. If I want to pick up a pencil and draw, paint, kit bash spaceships out of plastic bottles, photo scan it, generate it in Stable Diffusion, keyframe it, motion capture an actor, or build a puppet out of cardboard, I can. I know how to do it, and with all of this wonderful technology that, frankly, is the greatest embarrassment of riches ever to befall the average human being in the history of our civilization, why wouldn't you want to take advantage of that and tell your story? Why would you slap it away in anger? Aren't you bored of being the victim? Victory is so much sweeter. I'm currently building a production pipeline that will be able to create cinema quality animation and VFX for pennies from my own home, and there are a lot of others like me who are about to seemingly come out of nowhere and drink Hollywood's milkshake. Reference from There Will Be Blood. And just to stop for a second there, honestly, it is going to be somewhat cinema quality. It will have a look to it, as CGI has a look to it versus practical effects versus stop motion versus pencil drawn animation. But on my budgets, it's going to be spectacular. I'm really excited about it. I'm really excited to share what I've got going. And I'm very glad to be working with some very talented people who I wouldn't have otherwise been able to hire, hence no job at all, if it weren't for AI filling in the gaps where otherwise the budget wouldn't have made it feasible. Anyway, let me continue because this video is super long already. You say it's not art. If you consider yourself an artist, then you might have a point. But do you want to spend your days arguing about it or creating? Do it your way if art for art's sake is the goal. But remember that entertainment is also a business, and it needs more artisans than artists if you're going to make money doing it. Keep that in mind because the studios sure do, and so am I. You need to be competitive, not destructive. If you're someone in the industry who insists on keeping things the way they are, then I'm competing with you. Not for studio dollars, but for the audience. Will you broaden your definition of scab to fit me? Guess what? I don't care. That word is meaningless where I live, and soon it will be so for Hollywood too. It makes no difference. I predicted this years ago, and yes, by the way, let me click this link. The one-man film crew. I wrote this for Iron Age Media. It's not very long. 2 years ago, over 2 years ago, and it has my predictions in it. So go to the article, click that link, and check it out. I won't read this at the moment. Maybe I'll do another video where I read it and talk about it. And by the way, I understand if there's certain ways of doing things that are old school and people still value them, whether it be the people creating them or the audience watching them. I'm not saying there isn't room for this stuff, but we do need to make room for what's new as well. We can't keep things the way they are. I definitely value practical effects and puppets, and I want to continue to see them, and I am using them in Escape from Planet Omega 12, as I've said before. I'm able to do that because of AI. It's not the other way around. AI is not making it so I can no longer do practical effects. I couldn't have the budget to do fully practical effects movies. I did the Quantum Terror, and even then I was using digital technology to enhance the practical effects. and I was able to do it. AI is just going to enable me more. And I think I've clarified it by this point that it's not stealing. One of the arguments as well that Mr. Russo made was that, well, obviously AI is stealing because there are lawsuits right now. Well, yeah, there's going to be a lot of lawsuits. Lawsuits do not equal that it's going to settle the way you think, or that even that the settlement may be right. That's why we have higher courts, and that's why we bring in experts to discuss this stuff. It's new, so we're going to have some discussions over it, and sometimes decisions are going to be wrong, and sometimes lawsuits are going to be frivolous. But anyway, let me get back to it. Where was I? Of course. I predicted this years ago. The industry is going to become decentralized and more modular. The auteur creators will no longer need lucrative backers to bring their vision to life and present it to the audience. And because of this, they'll make a living, and the ripple effects will make a living for others. Theaters will start making more deals with independent creators through aggregators and sales platforms, much in the same way we're seeing it start to happen with video-on-demand platforms. We'll also witness a rise in more general streaming services like Tubi that can sustain themselves by bringing in audiences looking for old content that they can watch for free with ads, and then offering them newer material that they acquire, often non-exclusively at low risk to their own operation because they didn't have to pay up front for it. The same goes for video games and even music. Creators and artists will realize they can negotiate better contracts individually, that their talent and the quality of their work, and the value they add will help them become more competitive without being hamstrung by everyone having the same terms as everyone else. The guilds will largely become redundant until they can figure out why they exist in the first place and course correct. There is a link in here to a discussion I had the last time IATSE was threatening to go on strike with Fee.org's Sean Malone, where we discuss more about the benefits of guilds and unions. Having said that, Having said all of that, there's no proof that AI is going to replace anyone. If this was a movie script, you'd call that a red herring. The executives who have been doing all the layoffs and closing productions were looking for a reason to do that already because of everything I've covered and more. The tech developers overhyped these programs to get investors and venture capital, but we're finding out that a lot of the demos are fake. Not that all of them are, but a lot of them are. Projections and timelines come to pass with no progress, and a lot of the releases don't deliver what they promised. Stop letting it scare you into making rash decisions or out of making good ones. And I'll add to this as well. You know, the people who use AI and create amazing things with it will create amazing things with it because they are artists and they are willing to push the boundaries of what it can do. But it's still going to be the human hand guiding it and refining it. It's not going to be the catch-all solution. If you're worried about it in that sense, don't worry. Because even if the studios try and replace you with it, they're going to find out the hard way and they're going to need you back. And the people that they get back are going to be the ones that know how to use it properly. So don't be that person. Okay, so what should be done? If I had a say in the movie industry, I'd make an effort to stop releasing high-budget projects onto video on demand until they'd had time to be missed. Once they were out of the theaters, I'd also pull the films that are considered classics from streaming and start offering them on physical media and incentivizing audiences to buy players once again. Disney's Vault was a big moneymaker. You can make a movie feel special by giving the audience a sense of exclusivity and ownership. In reaction, maybe they'll discover forgotten gems on your platforms, and then you can offer them special edition hard copies of those too. But also be aware that the medium is evolving, and start thinking about how to evolve with it. YouTube and TikTok have their storytellers, and while it may not be the final form, the people playing in that sandbox will be the ones to own the future. AI won't stop them. It'll empower them, and if you think that's taking a job away from a real artist, remember that before that point, those people couldn't offer you a job at all. Now, they can. Without AI, my upcoming indie animated film, Escape from Planet Omega 12, couldn't exist, but because of it, I was able to pitch for a budget that allowed me to hire multiple artists and voice actors to bring the human element to my story. I said a little bit about that before. It seems to be making people mad that the average person now can tell a story, that they can try their hand at it. If there's a demand for it, there will be room for those who aren't afraid to dive in. If there's not, then we'll go back to what worked before. However, if you think you can force the issue, it'll be nothing but ashes for everyone. That's the free market. That's the economy. That's reality. If you haven't noticed, the economy isn't doing too well all over right now, and no one is coming to save you if it gets worse. Life is short and getting shorter all the time. If you need to be in movies, then you have to figure out what it'll take and what you can do to make it work. If you can do something else and be happy, then by God, do it, because the entertainment world is going to get a lot smaller before things change. Take care of yourself. I wish you every success. Godspeed. And then one more quote from Larry the Liquidator. I'm not your best friend. I'm your only friend. I may not be your only friend, but look, I wrote this because I am scared about the economy. There are lunatics trying to run everything right now. Or more accurately, there are lunatics in charge who aren't running anything right now except for industries and economies into the ground. I'm sorry, there's a lot of hyperbole around elections and economies and AI and all this sort of thing. You can't let people just tell you what's going on, because most of it's wrong. I tell my children, 95% of what you hear on the internet is wrong. You have to go digging. You have to explore. If you plan on using any of this information to navigate the world, and Hollywood is no exception. So I'm going to stop there. I've gone on long enough. Again, please check out Escape from Planet Omega 12, this pitch trailer I put together. It's 9 minutes. It's just, what is it? It's a 45-second teaser, and it's a pitch that goes on till about the 4-minute, 45-second mark. So it's a 4-minute pitch. And then the rest is a hand-drawn, not AI-generated, storyboards that I did for the opening. I think you'll find it a lot of fun. And yes, AI is going to be used again, but with all the other traditional techniques, I do consider myself a rather talented filmmaker and artist. You can check out The Quantum Terror right now on video on demand. It's on Tubi, Amazon Prime, Apple TV, Filmzy, and a whole bunch of other video on demand platforms. Please check it out, because I do think we made a good movie on a $15,000 budget. It looks like it cost $15,000, but it also looks better than anything else out there that you would ever see made for that amount of money. Because I am a experienced effects artist and director